Hello, my name is Reverend Dr. May Elise Cannon. Today is Wednesday, August 28th. Today is day 327 since October 7th. Israel launched major operations in the West Bank in the last 24 hours. Palestinian medics have said that at least 10 people were killed. The military and internal security service of Israel said that the operation was aimed at infrastructure used by militants in the cities of Jenin and Tulkarm. According to the news from Tel Aviv, hundreds of Israeli troops launched raids on several different areas inside of the occupied West Bank on Wednesday, today, carrying out massive arrests, engaging in gun battles, and killing at least 10 Palestinians, according to the Palestinian Red Crescent Society. The IDF said counterterrorism operations began overnight, focused on the northern West Bank areas of Jenin, Tulkarm, and the Al-Farah refugee camp. It said the operation was carried out in coordination with Israeli border police and internal security services, that it was in the first phases, according to an IDF spokesperson. Eyewitnesses described drones scanning the skies, bulldozers ramming through terrain, armored personnel carriers on the streets, IDF surrounding hospitals, setting up checkpoints, going into houses, making certain arrests. According to Israeli, US, Egyptian, and Qatari negotiators, there were meetings in Doha today for technical working level talks on continued possibilities related to a Gaza ceasefire negotiation. That was according to Reuters. An Israeli delegation left for Qatar for those further talks with mediators to try to negotiate a deal between Hamas and Israel. The delegation of officials from Mossad, Shin Bet, and IDF is expected to try to narrow the gaps regarding security arrangements. These are particularly related to those areas such as the Netzarim corridor, which is dividing North Gaza from South Gaza, and the presence of Israeli forces along the Philadelphia corridor, along the border between Egypt and Gaza. In addition, a source involved in the deal told Haaretz, unless there is some flexibility on those issues, it's doubtful that there would be any progress towards the secure and release of the additional hostages. Whether or not there's a ceasefire in Gaza is largely a question of whether or not there's any room for negotiation about those particular issues. That's according to Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas. In addition, Al-Qadi, who was rescued by the Israeli Defense Forces this week after escaping from Hamas captivity after 326 days, he was just discharged from a medical center in Israel. After being discharged, he said his happiness is not complete as long as there are detainees here and there, every one of them, whether Arab or Jewish, has a family waiting for them. Everyone wants to be happy, and I pray for an end to this. He told Prime Minister Netanyahu that Netanyahu must put an end to this. I do not wish where he was being held in captivity on anyone. When he addressed the public, he said, do everything you can, protest and everything to bring these people home. Fadi Abu Sahaman, Al-Qadi's cousin, said that Hamas didn't give him concessions because he himself is a Muslim. He says they let him pray, but that's the only thing that they allowed him to do. The former mayor of the southern Israeli town said that Al-Qadi told his relatives about one of the hostages who was held captive with him for 2 months and also died next to him. Family of hostages rallied in Hostage Square in Tel Aviv to call for a hostage deal before leaving in a convoy of cars headed to the Gaza border. Shiri Elbag, the mother of the hostage Liri Elbag, welcomed Al-Qadi's return, but said that the deal will only bring back the remaining hostages. The Philadelphia corridor, the Netzarim corridor, or Rafah are important but reversible. We just want the hostages brought home. The IDF in Shin Bet announced that they recovered the body of an Israeli soldier who was killed on October 7th that was taken by Hamas into Gaza. And Israeli forces made further announcements about the specific operation of how they got Farhan Al-Qadi, who was 52 years old, how they got him out after his rescue. He is an Israeli Bedouin Arab minority, and he is the 8th hostage to have been rescued alive since the October 7th attacks. The UN haltingly resumed its humanitarian operations in Gaza yesterday, according to UN officials, after so many evacuation orders have been made in the area of Deir al-Balah, which is one of the main logistics center for humanitarian services. The New York Times reported, and the Israeli Defense Forces reported that 2 of their soldiers have been killed in fighting in Gaza in the last 2 days. One was 19 years old and the other was 32 years old. One was killed on Tuesday and the other was killed today on Wednesday. In the West Bank, the U.S. imposed sanctions on the Yitzhar settlement security chief, Itzhak Levy-Filant, and on Hashem Aryosh, which is an NGO, that's an Israeli NGO, whose volunteers, according to the State Department, fenced off a Palestinian village to prevent residents from returning after they were forced to leave in January. Filant, the State Department said, led in February a group of armed settlers to set up roadblocks and to conduct patrols to pursue and attack Palestinians that were on their land and to forcefully expel them from their lands. The Israeli Defense Forces published its finding of an investigation on violent settler attacks earlier this month related to that attack on the village of Jit, in which settlers burned vehicles, attacked residents, and killed a 23-year-old. According to the findings, the Shin Bet provided the IDF and police with intelligence that settlers were planning nationalistic violence ahead of the incident, and that the IDF should have operated with more determination. The IDF's head of Central Command said that the incident constituted terrorism. That was about extremist settlers in the village that were attacking the Palestinian village of Jit. Palestinian Rescue Services said that 9 people were killed in what was that counter-terrorism operation in the West Bank overnight. That was where I started talking about those attacks and incursions by the Israeli Defense Forces into the West Bank. The IDF said that 5 militants were killed in an airstrike near Ner Shams that was being used by militants in the West Bank to plan terror attacks. And so the reports that we hear from the Red Crescent Society that resulted in the deaths of at least 10 Palestinians today, and the reports we hear from the IDF certainly contradict one another. The Palestinian Health Ministry said 1 person was killed from an IDF fire in the village of Dan near Jenin. In Israel, the IDF Chief of Staff Halevi visited the kibbutz Nahal Az and met with the kibbutz's council, families of hostages and bereaved families for the first time since October 7th. And the meeting lasted about 3 hours, according to the kibbutz, including that it was a painful and open discussion. And about 100 hostages who returned from Hamas captivity and the families of hostages who have returned or remain in captivity wrote, the family members of them wrote to the transportation minister, Regev, that they would not agree to the cynical use of the names of the hostages that the state has abandoned for nearly a year, and that they will not allow for their names to be used in the part of the national memorial ceremony that is scheduled to take place on the anniversary of October 7th. Israeli far-right National Security Minister Ben-Gvir suggested in an interview that he would like to build a synagogue at Jerusalem's disputed Al-Aqsa Mosque, that's on the Haram al-Sharif, drawing domestic and international condemnation, the New York Times reported. And in terms of Israel's hostilities with Hezbollah, an Israeli drone struck a car that was passing through a Syrian checkpoint near the border of Lebanon today, which reportedly killed 3 Palestinian fighters and a Hezbollah member. The United States top general said on Monday that the near-term risk of wider regional war has eased somewhat after Israel and Lebanon's Hezbollah exchanged fire without further escalation. I mentioned already about the U.S. State Department imposing sanctions on that settler organization and that particular settler. We did get news of that directly. And also our office today received a letter directly from the White House from President Joe Biden, addressed to me specifically in Churches for Middle East Peace. It was dated August 16th, and it said, this was from Joe Biden directly, and it said that the White House, I'll read it, it said, I won't read the whole thing, but he said, we are focused on securing a deal that returns hostages to their families, brings an enduring ceasefire, and preserves the space for peace for a 2-state solution. We're committed to working with and hearing from Arab Americans and Palestinian Americans who remain critical advocates for the Palestinian people and important voices throughout this challenging time. The U.S. stands unequivocally for the protection of civilians during this conflict and will do everything possible to prevent the conflict from spreading across the region. As I've emphasized publicly and to Israel's leadership, all countries must uphold international humanitarian law. Here at home, I've directed my team to identify, prevent, and disrupt any domestic threats that could emerge against Muslim, Jewish, or Arab communities, including Palestinian or any others. We'll continue to uphold them in our hearts, the families across our country and around the world who are mourning the loss of loved ones as a result of this tragedy. Sincerely, Joe Biden. So that's an update of what's happened in the last 24 to 48 hours. We'll continue in our efforts, praying for a breakthrough, working towards a comprehensive and permanent ceasefire agreement. Don't give up hope in that regard. May God go before us. Amen.